The Living Waters, Part 2. I'm going to try this again. I'm on Matthew 23, verse 36. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Again, the talk of this generation in the days of Jesus in this land, all end times belief systems going on today, the year 2026, it's just doctrines of man, ignoring what Jesus told them would happen. I just read how he says Zacharias, son of Barachias, would be slew. That happened. Tribulation happened in Jerusalem, 63 AD to 70 AD. Zacharias, son of Barachias, was killed between the temple and the altar, 67 AD. Witnessed and recorded by Josephus, the historian of the Jews. Jesus never spoke about anything beyond the generation that was walking and talking with him in that timeline. Everything else is doctrines of men. Jesus' timeline, his second coming, was in 70 AD, all witnessed, all recorded by all of the Jewish historians. So everybody today, all of these hypocrites called the clergy with this end times eschatology and all 4,000 religions, they're just ignoring the actual teaching of truth. Matthew 23:37. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that kill the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee. How often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Okay, Matthew 23:37 to 39. Basically, Jesus is lamenting over Jerusalem, saying, how often have I longed to gather your children together, as hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing. What is he pointing out? This is the rejection of divine invitation. Jesus offered protection and truth, but everybody, especially the religious authority, refused it. But it's right here where Jesus is affirming what was being told to us by Solomon, a prophecy in Proverbs 1, verses 24 to 31. All right, Proverbs 1, 24 to 31. Let's start with 24. Because I have called, and ye refused, I have stretched out my hand, and no man regarded. This is a prophecy of Matthew 23, 37 to 39. The people refused to be gathered, again, wanting man over divinity, over the kingdom within. This is the same parasitic thinking in the last days of Atlantis. So God hits a reset. We call that today a pole shift. Once the common sense is lost to lower base of emotions and doctrines other than divinity, it's how the reptilians have hive on our mind. It's emotion over reason. But we have set, Proverbs 1, verse 25. But ye have set at naught all my counsel, and would none of my reproof. What is the coherent point of what we just said there? Proverbs 1:25. The rejection is not just of a person, but of guidance and correction. This aligns with Jesus' critique of the Pharisees who rejected his teachings. In this timeline, the teachings of the demiurge and their archons have taken over, and everyone is in a hive mind that Jesus came to set free and offer life eternal. But the hive cannot hear it, let alone accept it. Only a few, just like today, can use or even see or hear reason over emotion and free themselves. It takes time to get out of your emotional body and let reason return. This has been taken out of the collective consciousness for at least, I'm just going to guess here, 300,000 years of humans at war with one another. Proverbs 1 verse 26, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. When your fear cometh as desolation, and your destruction cometh as a whirlwind, when distress and anguish cometh upon you. That is the natural consequence of rejection. Wisdom does not punish, but the field itself reflects back the choices made. The calamity is the result of ignoring truth. That is what is being told to you in Matthew 23:38, which happened in 70 AD to the temple that has never been rebuilt to this day. Proverbs 1 verse 28, then shall they call upon me, but I will not answer. They shall seek me early, but shall not find me. For they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. That's the very clergy. They hate knowledge. They do not fear the Lord. Verse 30. They would none of my counsel. They despised all of my reproof. Therefore shall they eat of the fruit of their own way, and be filled with their own devices. That is religion today, the fruit of their own way. That is the principle of karma, or energetic reflection. What you sow, you reap. Your own schemes, your own devices become your own prison. As told in Matthew 23:38, behold, your house is left unto you desolate. That happened in 70 AD. Both Matthew 23 and Proverbs 1, 24-32 speak to the same core truth. Let's bullet point it. Wisdom, divine truth, calls out to humanity. Humanity has the choice to accept or reject that call. Rejection, especially when rooted in hypocrisy, pride, or spiritual blindness, leads to self-inflicted calamity. The consequences are not punishment from an angry God, but the natural reflection of choices made in the field. Jesus' teachings in Matthew 23 are a real-time application of the timeless wisdom principles laid down in Proverbs. He's not just quoting the Old Testament. He's embodying its warnings and showing how they manifest in the religious structures of not only his day, but our day, you and me, Betsy, here and now. The coherence is profound. Both passages emphasize that true spirituality is not about outward performance, but about inner alignment with truth, humility, and service. When that alignment is rejected, the field eventually reflects that distortion back to the person or the collective. Here is where I had to throw in George Orwell, right? George Orwell had a quote. The more society separates itself from the truth, the more people will hate those who speak it. And well, we know that's true. This video is only going to get a handful of views. So just me alone, I proved that George Orwell was spot on. He saw it when he saw it coming. When he wrote this, it was already happening in his day. I believe he knew what the doctrines of man would lead to when he wrote his book, 1984. He could see that it actually already started in 63 AD, the 7-year fall of Jerusalem by the Romans. You know, it was a 7-year war. You really should read it. There's at least 12 historians that witnessed and recorded every bit of it. As 7 years of tribulation in Jerusalem, it was only meant for Jerusalem. Jesus only went to that area that is recorded in the Bible. He went to other areas, yes. And there's other writings about that. But he was telling the people in Jerusalem what would happen to them. He wasn't talking about a global event. There's nothing global about the teachings of Jesus when it comes to the land. The war on the land, the living hell that it did go through. After that war was done, after the 7 years of tribulation, that had completely destroyed the teachings of Jesus. Most of the people that held those teachings were killed by Nero. And then everyone started following the Vatican. The Vatican's idolatry over common sense, reason. That's when the reptilian archons who work for the demiurge, mocking Jesus, got the Vatican cardinals, bishops, and priests to dress the way they do. That's all that feeds the demiurge, the Old Testament God. That runs this world and its religions. They really took in the actions of Jesus. Listen to me here now. This is going to sound heretical and blasphemous, but it's not. It's the reptilian mind. And no one knows a reptilian mind better than I do. Because I had a handler. I know how they think. I know how they perform. I know how they handle us, humans. They watch Jesus' actions and they control us by what they learned from Jesus. They created religions by what the reptilians created religions by what they learned from Jesus. They did the opposite. Man, if we don't get that drilled in to our collective consciousness. They saw Jesus's rebellion against authority. They understood, reptilians now, understood the teachings of Jesus better than any human today understand Jesus' teachings. Jesus taught that we are all one consciousness. We are all one with our infinite Creator. And that one consciousness must never obtain this fact. That one consciousness can never act against authority as Jesus did. The brotherhood of man must never be a cornerstone in our thinking, let alone our consciousness. We must never serve that oneness of who we are. We must not think for ourselves. We must dominate and be the authority and follow what the reptilians have put in place. What is that? A pyramid of hierarchy and idolatry. Man must never be in service to men. Man must, however, follow a ladder of control and choke out a oneness mindset. To have an open heart of service? No, throw that away and do rituals that everyone does every weekend at their services. That is a pyramid scheme called religions, education, medicine, science, and by the way, just trust the plan. This is only to point out the diabolical mindset that reptilians have over humans. They really study. The reptilians completely studied Jesus and his way of living life as a peaceful warrior. Reptilians, not Jesus. A generation of vipers created religions to make us believe we are not to be a peaceful warrior. Listen, we are peaceful warrior brides. The reptilian religions in most of the buildings in this dome maintains peace within their buildings. That's true. But it does not make us warriors. It makes us part of the 99 sheep that Jesus does not care about. The reptilians watched Jesus grab the one sheep and declare, I care more about the one lost than the 99. That told the reptilian society, who use our fear and controlled minds, energy, food source, loosh, for their generator. The reptilians could see that one sheep, that one lamb, represented the one consciousness of divinity. Now don't get me wrong. The one light, the one divinity is available for all life forms. Most reptilians, I should say all reptilians are life forms. A lot of them chose to walk away from the light of oneness, and that's okay with God. All life has free will. But they took that one lesson Jesus demonstrated and made religions of idolatry, and today the collective is contaminated with a false light of consciousness, like the light at the end of the tunnel. So how do we tell when we are dealing with the false light not filled with living waters? They're low intelligence. They do not have common sense or reason. They repeat catchphrases like a program life form, a PLF. They are Christian influencers today. And what they like to do is perform in a captured audience. Where's a captured audience? Definitely on an airplane. That's captured. Definitely on a subway, in a train station, in an airport, or even a mall. That's all a captured audience. It's very dangerous. Don't let your young ones, your little ones, listen to their hellfire damnation, evangelical BS. So they find people that's huddled in a box somewhere, whatever name you need to give that box, you're captured. You're in prison with their evangelical believe or burn in hell mindset. That's a program life form. They are paid programmers programmed to give you catchphrases over truth. It's also known as idolatry. They are paid programmers without awareness. They have no expansion of consciousness. They're just running inside a tiny bubble of consciousness that's been basically pulled out and put into a time loop. They created a time loop. They're distortion away from truth, out of coherence, They created this time loop, and they can only speak language of that time loop. Their catchphrases. Believe or burn in hell. And they call themselves brave because they evangelize to their captured audience. They think they're going out and becoming a disciple. That is not what a disciple does. It does not capture an audience and tell you something Jesus never taught you. Jesus did not say, believe in me or burn in hell. Jesus would, can you imagine Jesus say, burn, baby, burn? That's a distortion. That's a very dangerous time loop, a frequency that you need to keep your little ones from being exposed to. What if we raised a generation without paid programmers? You know, you let your little ones be Jesus and they can't be turned into PLFs, let alone NPC. What if we could think like this? Every time we talk with each person throughout our day, we start out with, like in the movie Avatar, I see you. But let's take it a step further. I see the God within you. And what would the God within you that's different from the God within me? What can we share with each other? Can you imagine two humans sitting down, knowing they're a different neuron of infinite intelligence, and we just share? We just talk without indoctrination. We just reflect back to each other our coherence of truth. We create a field around us, like in the fictional book Celestine Prophecy taught about, a field of coherence where invaders cannot invade our field of truth. What if that is how all of our thoughts were anchored in, and we go around our terrain just listening to God? God in the trees, God in the rocks, in the bushes. And we just welcomed in every conversation. At least a few sentences become our takeaway from God within. That person, that life form. The reptiles watched Jesus and his teachings on the difference. Jesus taught with reason over emotion. Jesus never appealed to our emotions. That is what theologians do. They appeal to emotions over reason. And this lack of reason captures your heart and mind, and you exchange your mind for emotions that now become your belief system. So that reason is replaced with emotion, and then you will call that emotional state your belief system, and then you will later turn your belief system into your intellect. You better pause and rewind, because if you can't get that in and you can't take that in, see it for yourself, because you're going to have to take that ego off. If you think of ego as a hat, you're going to remove the hat of ego to understand what I just said, let alone teach a generation. Because it doesn't, you adults out there, it doesn't matter. I'm not really talking to you, but I'm saying we got to teach a generation that. We got to teach a generation how to become Jesus. And if you're a mom or a grandmom, you care about that. I'm never going to be a grandmother. I still care about the baby souls coming in here. I care about God's creation. I care about all of God's life forms, every one of them. Insectoid, to trees, to whatever. And the reptilians, right, they know, and they only have reason actually. They know, the reptilians only know reason. That's how they win. That's how they control this world. That's how they control us. That's how they have us in emotional hive mind. The reptilians are the only ones today that are following the path of Jesus. And not for the light, but to turn us into emotional hive mind because we are a food source for the darkness. Until you can make this your I guess I want to say such a deep understanding that so you can teach this to a young, 5-year-old person, 7-year-old person. You have to embody that. You have to accept the supernatural of who you really are. You have to understand the spiritual warfare you're fighting. You are fighting the fact that you are controlled by your emotion and allowing for your reason, your common sense, and your logic to be hijacked. Right now, theology and all religions, it's high emotional impact, and it's leaving the reasoning of the teachings of Jesus in the dust. Religions are built on emotion that create belief systems that become intellect. It's how Christians took 2 verses of the same message and had to make Jesus die out, blood offering on a cross. Jesus knew that would happen, so he covered this lie of your religions, especially you Christians, twice. Matthew 9:13, Matthew 12:7, Jesus came for mercy and not sacrifice. Saying he was sacrificed on a cross is lies, it's emotion, and it's hypocrisy. But the emotions of his suffering conjures up and then further solidify human belief systems that he suffered for our sins, that is how much he loves us. That is heresy. That is blaspheming Holy Spirit. Jesus taught with reason. Jesus' teaching was black and white, bare, basic facts. You either produce good fruit or bad. You either love God yourself and all others as one being and serve that oneness in everyone. The reptilians, they understood this teaching at a core that no human can fathom due to their addiction to being in the emotional body that is ego, lower chakras below the heart, that the civilization in the age before Pisces created in Atlantis, that is to say ego, first, second, and third chakra, never getting to the heart, that makes us easily controlled and steered in a direction that leads away from God to a self-centered, narcissistic, just like the reptile kingdom and the humans who work for them. They're called the clergy. Their god, Satan, being the head of the orchestra, once heavenly orchestra, taught them music for their religions, and today that 1 hour of music is hypnosis that keeps a human returning for an emotional dump. That emotional dump they call worship. It's a download of sorcery and not worship. Today the religious so-called Jesus influencers, evangelizers, they use emotions. They think they are brave in evangelizing. It goes like this. It is, by the way, the opposite of Jesus, but they have a big reach. And I care about the young ones getting trapped with them on a plane. So how can we address this evangelizing belief systems? How do we begin to deprogram from this sorcery? How do we recognize it? Well, it's easy. First step is they're going to use fear and guilt. They're going to throw at you threats of hellfire, judgment, and eternal separation, creating an emotional pressure pot, boiling point. Then they're going to use guilt over sin or unworthiness. They're going to make people desperate for a solution, even if it does not make full logical sense. Then next, they're going to offer you hope and comfort. This is training. This is programming. It's a PLF. It's the clergy. Next comes hope and comfort. Promises of salvation, belonging, or divine protection that offers emotional relief. People are going to turn to this in times of stress or loss. People are more open to messages that offer comfort, even if those messages bypass critical thought. And then comes the exhalation, right? The awe factor, the music, the charisma, the charismatic worship, the dramatic testimonies or claims of divine presence, all of the casting out of demons. It all creates a powerful emotional highs. These feelings can be mistaken for spiritual truth, making people less likely to question the message. It offers tribal identity and belonging. Being part of a religious group offers community and identity. The emotional need to belong can override logical questions about the group's teachings or practices. How do you think cults start and thrive? It's because the emotions are strong. Emotion replaces reason. People start to believe things they feel true, not because they are logically coherent or supported by evidence. They label these emotionally created beliefs as intellect or faith, but they are actually emotional attachments dressed up as understanding. Jesus knows this about the state of a human. That's why Jesus' approach was always logic and reason through truth. Jesus, with an emphasis on Matthew 23, did not appeal to emotional manipulation. He appealed to truth, also known as coherence, also known as unity. In Matthew 23, Jesus exposed the gap between the word and the deed, Matthew 23:3. He showed how outward performance without inner truth was meaningless, Matthew 23:5-7. Jesus used logical woes to reveal the contradictions in the Pharisees' behavior, Matthew 23:13-36. Jesus taught through parables that require thought and discernment and not emotional reaction. Jesus emphasized fruit, what actions come from belief, as the test of truth, not feelings, Matthew 7:16. Jesus did not reject emotion, but he didn't build his teachings on it. He built on inner coherence, integrity, and alignment between your thought, words, and actions. How do you, mom and dad, bring up a generation to logic and reason? Here's what we teach our little ones. When you feel trapped in emotionally driven belief systems, and we need to get back to a field of truth, a positive frequency, we teach our young ones to become self-aware. We teach them to ask, what emotion am I feeling right now as I consider this belief? Always question everything. Ask your little ones to always say, when you hear them state a belief, why do I believe this? What's driving this belief? What is it, evidence? Or is it just a feeling that's creating a belief system right now? Does this belief align with the life and teachings of Jesus, or the interpretation of others? That's a true coherence check. Because evangelists, they moved completely away from the teachings of Jesus, and they created their own interpretations. Teach your little ones, does this belief make sense logically? Does it align with your heart, mind, congruency? Or better yet, does it produce good fruit? Teach your little ones what good fruit is. Kindness, clarity, being in service. Make your life about being in service to others. Grounded in action. True logic and reason are not just mental. They are expressed through consistent, coherent actions. If a belief doesn't lead to integrity in your life, it could be because it has emotional construction around it. Truth can be complex, but they should not be contradictory. Logic can hold paradox, but it cannot hold contradiction. Teach your little ones always to find spaces of discernment, like I had to do. Before I put this video together, I went to Brian Head, Utah. My space of discernment was with the Ponderosa Pines and Aspen Groves. And I spent 5 days in Ponderosa Pine Trees and Aspen Groves. That was my community. That was my teacher. I spent time with critical thought, humility, and inner truth. Not emotional dogma. Not with emotionally created beliefs. A belief held because it feels good, because it feels safe or necessary, without deep questioning. That's how you get these theologians that cannot discern that Paul is oil and water. Paul is the oil that is separated from the living waters of Jesus' teachings. That's a dangerous place to be. That a theologian that has said he has dedicated his life to the living word cannot discern that is incredibly dangerous, and do not expose young minds to that kind of danger. They want doctrine of man over the living waters. You just stop a generation from doing that. Just because there's 13 books and the holy living word does not make it true. It just shows to show you what man can do with his dogma, namely the Vatican. Following the Vatican over Jesus' teachings is deeply incoherent. We are meant to use our intellect not as belief systems, but the capacity to discern, to analyze, and to integrate information coherently, even when it challenges your emotions. And you take any Christian and you tell them that Paul, Saul the Butcher, is a false prophet, they can't go there. That tells you that their intellect has been programmed. They're a programmed life form. They're making their way towards becoming a non-participating consciousness. In other words, they're leaving the one infinite, intelligent, universal mind of God, and they want to participate outside of that light. They're saying, program me, I like my programming, I don't want to use my own concernment, my feelings are my anchor is then called my intellect, my belief system, that's their safe space, and God allows for that. I'm saying we bring up a generation that I'm not looking to change them. I'm not looking to convert them. I'm saying, can we allow a generation to be brought up without their interference? That's all I'm here doing at this point. That's all I'm here doing. Can we allow them to be who they are and not enforce it on our 3-year-olds? Can we do that? Can we not enforce it on our 2-year-old or 3-year-old or 4-year-old? Can we just allow the little ones to become a coherent field to mirror back to the adults how wrong you are? Can you adults accept that? You're wrong. You've been programmed. You're all a PLF headed towards an NPC away from the light. Now, I pray for the adults every day. But like I said, I'm here. If we can get the 5-year-old to mirror back the truth to an adult and be like children as Jesus taught us, can you adults accept that? Can you not throw your distortion, your lies, and your pride onto the little ones? Can you stop that? Can you adults take responsibility and realize you were not taught how to not become a PLF? And you're so heavy in your PLF state, your programmed life form, headed away from the light into non-participating consciousness, NPC. Can you just say, I don't want to regurgitate that onto my baby? Can you accept that? Do you know how close that's going to bring you to Jesus when you say, Jesus, I don't want to harm your little ones? It would be better if that millstone was tied to your neck. Adults, take responsibility. Intellect is not cold or heartless. Intellect is clarity, the ability to see truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and to hold it with both mind and heart congruent. Religious systems use emotion to hook people, replacing reason with emotional attachment. Jesus taught through coherence, logic, and integrity. Jesus always challenged emotional performance, demanding inner truth. In order for us to return to logic and reason, we got to become aware of our emotional drivers, especially the music you think you're singing to God at your services. That is performance. Only Satan wants performance and rituals. God wants humility, never performance. This is what social media guys do with their evangelizing. It's all performance, and it has nothing to do with the teachings or life of Jesus. Lying to yourself about this has no value other than boosting up your ego. We need to literally journal every single belief we have and begin to question it. Check for coherence in every thought, word, and action that you put out there in the field. Ground your understanding in fruit, not just feeling. This is not about rejecting emotion. It's about letting emotion serve truth, not dictate it. Jesus used parables, short stories, like analogies, to teach deep spiritual truths. He did not use them to create emotional highs or to bypass critical thought. He used them to stimulate imagination and critical thinking. Parables make you think. They don't give you the answer directly. They invite you to discern it. Each person can interpret a parable according to their own intellectual and spiritual level. Jesus always comes to where you are, not where you should be. He lets you evolve back into coherence at your own pace. Jesus is not salvation, he is a coach. Parables start with familiar things. In his timeline, the familiar things was farming, seeds, and oil lamps. He used them to introduce spiritual or supermaterial realities. This is a logical progression, building understanding on what's already known. Jesus' teachings were about moral decisions, making moral decisions. Because parables are stories, they bypass personal prejudice. You can reflect on the truth without feeling personally attacked. They encourage you to examine your own judgment and decisions. Parables allow Jesus to present new and challenging truths without directly clashing with tradition or authority. This was a strategic use of logic, presenting truth in a way that minimizes resistance. Make Jesus your anchor. When you encounter familiar scenes later, like example, the sower in a field, the parable lesson comes back to you. It shows how parables use logic to embed truth in your memory. You guys know this, the parable of the sower, Matthew 13, 1-23. It's an example of Jesus' coherent teaching. Let's break it down. The sower represents anyone who shares truth or the message of the kingdom. The seed represents the truth or the word. Then comes 4 types of soil in this parable. The 4 types of soil represent 4 different ways people receive the truth. The first, the path. On the path, Jesus teaches the seed is snatched away. That is to say, truth not understood. Then the seed is thrown on the rocky ground. The seed sprouts quickly, but has no root. So that means the truth is accepted emotionally, but not deeply. Mind-heart congruency. Then you have the thorns. The seed is choked by worries and wealth. Truth overwhelmed by external distractions. And then you have the good soil. The seed produces a crop. What does that mean? The truth is received, understood, and lived. That's coherence, unity mindset. We are all one in action. Jesus uses a simple, relatable analogy, farming, to explain a complex spiritual process, how people respond to truth. He doesn't tell you what to feel. He shows you the logical outcomes of different responses to truth. He then explains the parable to his disciples, demonstrating that it is meant to be understood, not just felt. The parable teaches that fruit, what grows from the seed, from the word, is the measure of whether the truth has taken root. The parables of Jesus are a powerful demonstration of logic and coherence, of reason and spiritual teaching. They stimulate critical thinking. They build an understanding from the known to the unknown. They bypass prejudice, and it anchors truth in memory. It shows that inner coherence, the good soil, leads to outer fruit. They are not emotional hooks. They are mirrors of your own reception or reflection of truth, inviting you to see where you stand and what kind of fruit you are producing. So, look at restoring divine justice in our field for our little ones. Divine justice is not punishment. It is coherence restored. It is the natural consequence of distortion returning to its original harmonic state. It is not imposed from above. It is unfolded from within the field. It is not about making someone suffer. It's about making the field whole again. Jesus taught this in the parables like the sower. The seed that falls on thorns is choked, not by divine wrath, but by the internal conditions of the field. Divine justice is a tormented society. I should say, divine justice in a tormented society. In a world tormented by deception, exploitation, and emotional manipulation that Jesus taught us in Matthew 23. Divine justice manifests in several ways. Number one, which I'm hoping is coming sooner than later, exposure. What was hidden is brought to light. Now that's not always comfortable, but it's necessary for coherence to return. As I've been talking about, the Epstein files are a prime example. A hidden network of distortion is now being revealed, not by human will alone, but because the field can no longer hold the distortion. At some point, God hits a reset. What we can expect next is a collapse of false authority. Systems built on emotional leverage, fear, or control begin to lose their grip. People start to question institutions, leaders, politics, narratives, governments that lack coherence. This is not chaos. It is truth destabilizing illusion. And we come back to what I hope is the youngest generation becoming leaders. As false systems collapse, new voices emerge, not seeking power, but offering clarity, integrity, and service. This is the good soil leaders. Jesus spoke of those who produce fruit, not just noise. Most of social media, the big guys, the big platforms, they're noise. Go look at social media by 20-year-olds. If you want to find out what I'm talking about, go find 20-year-olds that know how to discern and understand what I'm telling you right now. Now, I've only found 2, but the point is they exist. They exist. People who have participated in distortion, knowingly or unknowingly, begin to feel the internal pressure of incoherence. This can manifest as anxiety, illness, or a deep need to confess or change. It's not punishment. It's the soul's call to return to alignment. So as we expose, whether it's Epstein files, UFO files, Fauci, I don't know, all of this stuff is coming to fruition. All of the scandals are coming to surface. It's a symbolic rupture, not rapture, rupture in the global field to expose a hidden geometry of power, perversion, and control that has operated outside moral or legal coherence. They reveal, this happened in Atlantis, guys, it happened in Lemuria, it's happened, this is repeat like clockwork. All I'm telling you is what's stored inside of me. I've watched it time immemorial. And hopefully my container's about up. I'm about out of here, but anyway. This hidden geometry, it will reveal how emotional and spiritual manipulation can be used to exploit the vulnerable and silence the truth. So how are we going to restore coherence? After I want to just say long, over 12,000 years of deep distortion. Well, I can tell you the veil is thinning. The age of hidden power is ending. What I have called in the past in other videos, the Aleph Niner, right? The age of Pisces. What was once protected by secrecy and shame can no longer hide. The water bearer, the age of Aquarius, is cleaning up the dark waters of consciousness snare we have been trapped in. This is not because of human effort alone. It's because the planetary field is demanding transparency. Thank you, Lord, within me. Those who built systems of distortion will face judgment by consequence, not fire, but collapse. Their influence will wane, their narratives will lose credibility, their emotional leverage will finally fail them. This is the Gehenna Jesus spoke of, a state of being out, or I should say cut off from coherence, where their own choices burn away their power. Then we'll have the rise of the coherent field, a new geometry. As one distortion collapses, a new field of geometry emerges. People will begin to trust integrity over charisma, clarity over comfort, service over performance. That is the kingdom of God, Jesus taught. A field of truth, love, and alignment that grows from within. Divine justice is not punishment. It is truth restored. In a tormented society that we are in today, it manifests as exposure, collapse of false authority, and the rise of Jesus type of leadership. If you allow a generation to emerge, the Epstein files are a symbolic rupture, not rapture. Rupture, a sign that the field can no longer hold deep distortion. This will come to fruition not through vengeance, but through the natural consequences of incoherence and the emergence of a new field of transparency and integrity. This is not about waiting for judgment. It's about becoming the judgment by living in coherence, speaking truth, and refusing to participate in emotional manipulation. I say all of this only because the reptilian hive mind has gotten the collective adults in this black widow's web. And while I cannot turn an adult away from their belief systems, maybe, and I'm praying for a young parent, will say, I will raise a generation up to not live as I have lived, but by the teachings of Jesus, over emotional indoctrination and religious zealotry and idolatry. I will raise my baby to choose God within, and her creation of life forms return to a spiritual truth over dogma of men and their rituals. I will not partake in the systems of this kingdom. I will go inward to the God within me and raise my baby from that state of truth, alignment, and unity. Amen. Anita K. Owens. Potter is nearly expired.